Up, guys? So, why are you still single? That is a very pertinent question. So, let's start with the basics, right? The reality is, I'm telling you from my perspective, I was, and I think maybe you may be in the same position. I'm needy. I was needy. I needed more than I could get, and I wasn't willing to admit the fact that I hadn't put in enough work to deserve the things that I thought I wanted to have or I thought I deserved. That's the first part. Stop being so damn needy because it rubs off. It's very obvious when you love bomb somebody, when you're constantly texting them, when you get upset if they don't text you back at a certain time, things of that nature. Stop being so damn needy. I think when you have your priorities aligned, when you understand that you and your projects become priority, they become first, everything else has to be taken into account in the order that it is given. You have to make that choice, right? You have to decide the things that I'm working on become more pertinent and more important to my life than finding someone, right? And the funny part about that is that women will respect and value that in turn, right? They understand they want somebody who's working towards something, who's on a path, who's driven, who's determined. Those things matter so much more. Okay, so the other thing is too, this is a reality. Some dudes, maybe you as well, you're too boring, you're uninteresting, you have nothing interesting to say. And that, unfortunately, I can't fix that, right? And then, well, you're wondering to yourself, well, how do I do that? How do I become more interesting? How do I not be boring? My my input and insight into this would be what? First off, the many slip-ups I had to endure, right? A lot of the embarrassing uh conversations, the awkwardness, the weird vibes that I was giving off, all that, all those losses, right? Quote unquote losses, all those lessons, very important, right? So one was I just realized that I just had to talk to people. I just had to, that was how I learned, right? Through practice. It was really that simple. Right? Practicing and speaking to people. But then you ask yourself, well, speak about what, right? I have nothing to say. I'm a boring guy. I spend all day at home playing video games, you know, doing God knows what. Okay, so then if that is you, what you have to do is what? Um, I would recommend you read some things. The other thing is go outside, explore, get lost, maybe get hurt. I don't know, but have something interesting to say, be observant, but also embed yourself in the landscape, right? Make yourself somebody that people know, people talk to, right? Really get yourself involved in your community, whatever that looks like, right? It's your civic duty to be out and about. And as a man, really the only thing that is very apparent is your experience in this world, right? That's how you learn the most, right? It's through experience. You can read all the stuff you want, and that does help. But the reality is, you got to get out there. You got to test it out yourself. You got to get out there. You got to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so that is how you become um, interesting and not boring, right? As you get outside and you have experiences and you have things to say. The other thing is you haven't been rejected enough. And I mean rejection in everything, not just like rejection with women, rejection in any endeavor. I think that really does, it does ground you, right? It is painful, very painful, but it leaves you with a sense of who you are more clearly than anything else, right? There's nothing that tells you who you are more than all the things that you haven't been able to do. Because the funny thing about slipping up and failing is that it gets very comfortable and you become desensitized to it and you're willing to just do whatever it takes. Because it doesn't matter, right? You've been there before, you've tasted defeat. Failure isn't that bad. It gets a lot easier. So that's one thing, right? You need to be open to getting rejected. And I think that translates easily into finding someone easily. Um, the other thing, and this might be a bit ironic, but, and this is from my experience, sometimes you're aiming too low, right? Because you're trying to play it safe with women. So you're going to say, I'm going to try to go up to like average girls or a little bit above average, right? Maybe a 6 or a 7, because I know that that's safe. And even if I get rejected, it won't hurt as much. But the reality is, if you're going to get rejected, you might as well get rejected by someone that you genuinely want to be with and you're very attracted to. So dabbling with these average ones, I'd say that that's for the private sphere. You know, you shouldn't take your losses in that category. Those are for private. endeavors, you want to have a little fun on the side, that's cool. I'm okay with that. I'm on board with that. I understand it. But don't put all your eggs in those baskets. It's just not worth the possible losses in that category, right? So don't play it safe. I would say, if anything, your ability to go up to girls that are probably out of your league or a little bit you're a little bit intimidated by, that's what you should go for, because that's the scary stuff. That's where you learn the most. And and I mean, at least for me, I was lucky enough to get a lot of positive feedback, even if I didn't necessarily get like a date, but I would get numbers, and so that was enough to tell me, okay, I'm doing something right. The other thing is, you got to get off dating apps. You have to get off dating apps, because the reality is dating apps are skewed towards women. They're the beneficiaries of it. There's way more demand for women, much less for a man. And I'm telling you, I'm speaking to you from someone that was on a Hinge, and I was a standout, if that means anything, right? And even for me, right, I would say that I'm a fairly good looking guy. On paper, I was pretty good, right? So my pictures and whatnot, I had curated the whole profile to kind of make me as attractive as possible. The interesting thing was that didn't necessarily give me the desired outcome. A lot of the girls that I ended up going out with, even after vetting them and talking to them, a lot of times were not really up to what my standards were in terms of was what I was expecting. Right, the difference between seeing their pictures and then seeing them in person is just night and day. So I would much rather run into someone in person, because if I don't like them, there's no filters, there's no angles. I see what I see, and if I don't like it, then that's it. It's end of story. And so there's a lot of things that people hide, with their pictures, with their angles and whatnot, that you only get to see once you see them. All right, so skip that. And I know that sounds crazy. It's like, oh my God, what am I gonna do if like I don't have that easy thing, right? You got to get outside, because the reality is, forget about the dating apps. I even wasn't on social media for like a year, and I actually ended up meeting more girls that way, because I was like, well, I don't have another option. I have to go outside. You know, there was nothing else I could do. It was either that or just remain single and not really have a complaint about it. So as I sort of I released myself from the pressure of being like, well, I don't have these options anymore. It made it so much easier to find women. It wasn't difficult at all to meet women. Um, so I think if you're doing all these things, as I mentioned, if you get away from all the bad things and focus on the good things. Here's the other thing. People think, oh, well, you need to have access to resources. Sure enough, yeah, I think so. For a long term, sorry, rather relationship, I think having resources, access to capital is super important. But let me just tell you, despite I've had many instances where I did not have a shekel to my name, where I didn't even have a vehicle, I didn't have a job. And yeah, looking back now, it's crazy. I shouldn't have been looking for women. I should have been focused on work. I managed to bag up many women, even when I didn't really have anything to my name. And you might say, well, how's that possible? Well, the reality was, I managed to kind of figure out a way to make myself interesting so that that wasn't such a point of contention. Um, like I said, and many times I was down and out, and I don't know. I think to myself, maybe it was because they saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, right? The potential that was in me. They invested maybe in that, right? And that's part of it, right? They were investing in a long term project. And I don't think they were wrong. I really don't think they were wrong. They just weren't the right person for me at the time. And moving forward now, I'm glad it didn't work out, because none of those people would I be with now. But it did teach me a lot about how to get women, and it definitely wasn't about money, because I didn't have a fancy car. I couldn't even say I really necessarily dress well, but I had the gift of gab. I knew my way with words. I was a wordsmith. So I'm telling you from experience, you don't necessarily need all the capital in the world. You don't need to have it necessarily all figured out. If you do, good. But if you don't, all these other intangibles are what's important. Yeah, the capital, hopefully it comes along. Hopefully you figure that part out. But in the meantime, if you don't, these are the things you got to focus on. And those are things that money can't buy, right? Get yourself into shape, make yourself interesting. All these things, right? They add up, they stock up, and they add, imaginary sort of interest. And so I remember specifically, I got this girl's number real quick, just a side tangent. I got this girl's number, hit her up for the date. Okay, cool. I had just caught my car, and for me, in my mind, I was like, well, finally, at least I have a vehicle, right? It was a used Corolla. I pulled up to her apartment, and she looks at my car, and she's looking at it crazy. I could tell she's she's really off put by the whole thing. I think in her mind, she thought I was gonna drive like a fancy car, tinted windows, all that shit. And when she saw that, she was really disappointed. Whatever. I was like, fine. Like, this isn't gonna go anywhere. We'll go out, have a drink, and then I'll take her home. I'll drop her off, and then it's over. Instead, what ended up happening along the date, she snoozed up to me, and I kind of just like, was just talking, just being myself, and just conversing with her. But over time, I saw her warm up to me, and the next thing you know, she wanted me to go up to her crib and do things that I probably wasn't prepared to do because at that time I was a really innocent guy. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Nothing happened, of course, but it just goes to show you, even though she quote unquote had made the decision that like, ew, this guy doesn't have what I'm looking for in terms of the material objects. But look, it didn't matter. It made him, it worked out for me in the long run. So it just goes to show you, don't make those excuses for yourself. Don't wait till everything is lined up perfectly, because by then you won't have the practice, right? All those slip ups, all those mistakes, all those lessons, those were all good for me, and they'll be good for you too. You just got to be willing to put yourself in those positions to get lucky, to get unlucky, to get hurt, to the positives and the negatives, everything in between. But anyhow, I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next one.